Morning. Welcome to the Outer Circle Inner Stillness podcast YouTube channel. My name is Rhys Pasimio. I'm a counselor in Gresham, Oregon, near Portland, Oregon, and joined by some fun friends and special guests today. Shea Layton is jumping in as a recurring co-host, so I'll let him introduce himself in a little bit. And our special guest, Dan Stevens, hailing from the deep desert down south in Arizona, and we'll get to know him a little bit as well. But yes, thank you again for listening. And just quick pitch: this show does very much appreciate financial contributions from listeners. So if you appreciate this sort of work and the conversations and topics we come up with, throw some dollars and cents and maybe some comments too, and that will be wonderful. But for starters, meet my other co-host, Shea. How are you? Who are you? What's your corner of the world these days?
Howdy. I'm Shea, sometimes known as Thaddeus or Thaddeus Patrick online. I'm an Orthodox Christian, and I do life coaching. That is kind of a blend of psychology and early Christian spirituality. There is a lot of connection between these two things, and so I spend a lot of my time working with clients, looking at the links between our relationship with God and psychological struggles that we have. And I have a lot of experience with bad applications of Christianity to psychology, things like, oh, you're depressed, so must just be you've done something sinful. So I'm very interested in things that actually help and that are not dismissive. And I've discovered that the first 1,000 years of Christianity has some of the deepest, most practical, and most effective spiritual traditions. So some of my clients are Eastern Orthodox like myself, some are Catholic and Protestant. Every once in a while I have some spiritual seeker come along who just wants to talk and explore different subjects. And sometimes I'm doing existential therapy where you're talking to people who are doubting, like, am I real? And how do we know it's true? So I'm a little all over the place, but God seems to bring me the people that I actually have some skill and equipment to help. So it's very, very enjoyable, very fulfilling. I've done a lot of different stuff, and been doing this about 4 or 5 years now. And I feel like I've kind of found my space in the universe to do what God's put on my plate. So
that's really wonderful to have found your space and to know, like, this is my corner, this is my garden, and I just get to cultivate it. And yes, and I appreciate you being here. I find, because of all of the books you've read that I probably will not ever read, I find your perspectives to be really interesting, and they fill in a lot of the knowledge gaps for me. So I appreciate that very much. Meanwhile, Dan, I know you've been here before on this space, but it's been a bit. Who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, I'm Dan Stevens. I'm a licensed mental health counselor in Washington State, though I take my residence in Arizona. I moved here last year. I don't know if you can call Glendale quite the deep desert. It's still fairly suburban here. But yes, it is hot here in the summer. Licensed professional counselor in Arizona. And then finally, as of earlier this year, I believe the official date was July something, although I don't have my paper in front of me, certified sex addiction therapist through ITAP. So that's been a training long in the waiting, and it's finally done. It's finally certified. Now I have to just maintain it and do the continuing education for that. So yes. I run a small nonprofit, small as in it's me and assistant and our board of directors. It's a counseling and research center. Of course, I am trying to hire more clinicians, need a bigger team. And yeah, we specialize in helping people overcome pornography addiction, sex addiction, infidelity, and betrayal trauma, and the whole constellation of other nasty stuff that causes or is related to in some form. There's some chicken and egg issues there. So
yeah. Congratulations. I'm really excited for you. I know I got that same certification a couple years ago, and it's been wonderful. It's been a wonderful community, wonderful specialty, a wonderful tradition to join up with. I was just at the symposium this past April, and it was just like, I don't know, some parts of me were feeling a little bit intimidated because there's so many smart people and so many highly accomplished people in the community. So I'm just like, I've got a little podcast over here. But yeah, there's some amazing people.
Yeah, there's some really incredible people, and I'm new to the community, but I definitely feel like it is a good community. I feel as a Christian practicing in the in sexual issues, in therapy, like there's a lot of politics, there's a lot of hostility there, but I have felt very welcomed and very at home in the ITAP community versus other therapist communities that I've been a part of. So that's been very pleasant.
Yeah, that is a really special thing where there can be this collective. We have enough space to have some big differences, and there are some vast differences of ideology practiced even within the ITAP and the CSAT community. But yeah, there's this very strong collegial spirit, which is nice. Not everyone can do that.
Yeah.
Well,
I certainly appreciate it.
Yeah,
I've been a beneficiary of it, so I will not complain.
Cool. So we're talking about sobriety work, long-term sobriety, and something related to the kinds of supports we need for maintaining a recovery longer term. Kind of an exploration of this podcast is like longer term sobriety that gets beyond just I'm stopping drugs, I'm stopping porn, I'm going to inpatient or something, and there's that initial like action stage where there's a lot of upheaval and a lot of action and a lot of learning. It can be kind of exciting, kind of terrifying, but at some point things start to simmer and settle into routine. And what I think is that it should be becoming a way of life that is just perpetuated, and in that sense mirroring a spiritual process, the process of spiritual growth, of conversion, which is also this lifelong way of life as well. But related to that, so Dan, when we were talking about this, you had pitched this research project that you were conducting. And I wonder if you could say more about what that is, what you're hoping to accomplish by it, and other things important to know about it.
Yeah. So the short version is Restored Life Counseling is launching. It's now up and running. So it has launched, and we're collecting participants, recruiting participants for a recovery outcome study. And we want to learn as much as we can about outcomes for recovery from pornography addiction, sex addiction, infidelity, and betrayal trauma versus other addictions and traumas. There's a lot of outcomes research that has been published on other addictions. There's not a whole lot that has been published on recovery from pornography addiction or sex addiction yet. And so, within the ITAP community, sort of the conventional wisdom is 3 to 5 years for stable recovery. And yes, there are, just like when you're cooking, you can get all the ingredients in the right place, but then you still have to let things simmer on the stove for a little while for it to get its full flavor.
And is that 3 to 5 years of like active involvement in counseling services, or what is that denoting?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I have not found a clear answer. So that's one of the things that I'm trying to research. Like, that's one of the questions being asked in the, at least in the background. It's not one of the survey questions per se of the recovery outcome study, but that is one of the background questions of, just what 3 to 5 years of what exactly. So Patrick Carnes did do a qualitative study in 2003. Perhaps it was published in 2003, although I haven't been able to find the original study itself. It was cited in one of the training slides for the CSAT Module 1. They have it labeled as the profile of success. And so there is some guidance from that study. I'll just read off a couple of things. So clients who have a primary therapist, a therapy group, 12-step meetings, who have addressed other addictions, who have clarified and resolved family of origin issues, and who have involved family in therapy and recovery. They have couples therapy or support. They have developed a spiritual life. I think that's kind of the particular tie-in for this podcast, and maintained regular exercise and good nutrition. That's the profile of success, according to the study from Patrick Carnes in 2003. That's just the summary of it that we have in the ITAP training slides. I have not been able to find the original study yet. I've emailed the ITAP listserv a couple of times, and I'm sure it's there somewhere. I just haven't found it. So your question of 3 to 5 years of what exactly? It's not really affordable for anybody, even cash practice CSATs, to do all of that at once. I don't know anybody that can afford to do that at once. I can't, and I'm an active CSAT. 85% to 100% of my client load is CSAT stuff, and I couldn't afford to do all that at once. So my assumption, I guess a hypothesis that's going to be tested in the research, is that those are happening in different pieces, different sequences, depending on the particulars of a client's story. So we'll see what the survey bears out by the end of the process. But we're going to be running this, I hope, for 10 plus years. The goal is to recruit 10,000 participants per year for at least 10 years, so that we can publish both cross-sectional research, large sample size, well-validated data, about what's going on in recovery this year with this sample. And then hopefully a portion of those stay on and continue taking the follow-up survey at some kind of frequency, weekly or monthly, for 10 years or more. And then we're going to have longitudinal research as well. So, Patrick Carnes' original study on that, the profile of success for recovery from pornography addiction or sex addiction, was a qualitative study. And the recovery outcome study that we're taking on is a quantitative study. And we're going to try to make it both cross-sectional and longitudinal. So that's the short version, the short explanation.
Yeah, that's really exciting. It sounds really ambitious and really smart, but also really, really necessary to be able to quantify these things. In this environment that really values like the quantifiable empirical data, that's really necessary. So yeah, I'm excited. I signed up for it. I'll be excited to be followed through that and everything. Even just hearing you read off this profile of success, like something about me like intuitively recognizes that as a true thing. And to be physically healthy, my family's healthy, I'm spiritually healthy, I'm doing these healthy habits, it kind of makes sense. And I think anyone who's in active recovery or who does addictions recovery work or does counseling work would intuitively recognize that as a kind of a true thing. But I also hear where it begins to connect to some of these bigger questions of like we said, like what are we measuring, and are we asking like what is recovery, how does change happen, how does healing happen, what's the role of people in community and in sports and everything.
There are lots of questions that we'll get to rabbit trail into. There will be some other follow-on surveys that are developed and sent to the participants as we analyze the data actively in current surveys. This is not just we're going to make one survey and wait 10 years and see how many people answered it and then analyze the data. We're going to be actively looking at it. So there will be lots of other questions we get to dig into. One of my big questions is can we shorten that 3 to 5 years? Does it have to take 3 years? Can it take 2?
Yeah. That would be nice. So maybe we could kind of unpack this a little bit. And love to hear from both of you. Let's see. If we ask, well, what is the change we're trying to make? I guess we're like, what is recovery? What is sobriety? From a more clinical and from a more coaching, lifestyle, spiritual perspective, like what do you both think the goal is that we're after here?
Yeah, I'm happy to hear both of you answer that, and then I'll share my thoughts.
All right, Shea, we're looking at you.
Okay. So for me, like I'm coming in with my very, what I see as very specific theological perspective. And I love conversing with people who are specifically focused on, like, from my perspective, I see as like the mechanics. And these days, I will say, as someone who was in psychology in more of a clinical perspective, which is invaluable, and then shifting to one where I guess I would sum it up as I don't know how to conceptualize psychology anymore without seeing that at the end of every trail is a relationship to God. And that's something, like I said earlier, I've seen the cliches of that, but I've truly experienced in some of my own spiritual walk that it's hard to conceptualize it without that, because a key part of, so if you read a lot of early Christian writers, one theme they repeat constantly is that this life fades away. No matter what, we all die. Like, we can try and accomplish things here, we can try and save up riches, whatever. It's not necessarily wrong to have material stuff, but we're going to die. And we also could just be taken now. God could take us now, but he has us here for a time. And so the big question is, what is the purpose of this time that we're here? And what the early Christians and the church fathers consistently say is repentance. And repentance doesn't just mean like, oh, God, don't punish me for a bad thing I did. The actual Greek word is metanoia, which is change of nous. And the nous is like the focus of the heart, where the heart is pointed. So metanoia, change of nous, is to point the heart back to God. And everything you read in these early Christian writers, everything from why does God allow trials? Why does he allow joys? Why does he allow us to fall into passions, addictions, inappropriate and unhealthy relationships with creation, which is what addictions ultimately are. And the reason is because all of it softens our hearts. All of it makes our hearts soft to realize I can't be my own God. I can't save myself. All of these little gods I've looked to make me happy, they don't work. And so for me, approaching a lot of addiction subjects is looking for that integration into the spiritual life. How does this battle and this warfare with this reality and all of these different things that come in, from community to nutrition, how are they all reflections of what my heart actually needs and what it's actually starving for? So that's some of the perspective I come into approaching subjects like this with.
Yeah, that's awesome. I didn't mention this earlier, Shea, but I really appreciate your reference that there's a lot of pastoral care and care for the suffering soul in early Christianity that is largely unattended to. You go to university, you take a psychology class, and where do they tell you the history of psychology starts? They tell you it started with Freud. That's bogus. I'm sorry. That's just dishonest history. And that's garbage history, and it needs to stop. We need to give credit where credit is due. Every religious tradition, not only Christianity, but every religious tradition in human history has had care for the soul. And as a Christian, I of course most appreciate the care for the soul from the Christian perspective. I am coming at this from a Protestant, Reformed-ish, and self-consciously often confused Reformed perspective. So I have lots of questions. But as for the quantifiable, measurable, or clinical things, the Psalms say that the heavens declare the glory of God, and so there is something worthy. Science, the conduct of the discipline of science, research, can be an act of worship to our Creator, I think, and so I think there is spiritual value in digging into the science of stuff. But I don't know, maybe I'm weird in that. I'm sure other people have written on that, and I just haven't read them yet. Rhys, your question, how do we define sobriety and recovery? In simple clinical terms, sobriety is how long you've gone without doing the thing that you want to stop doing, and recovery is how happy you are about it. Because you can have somebody who's white-knuckled sober, and that's really stressful and takes a lot of energy. Recovery is dealing with the underlying stuff.
I like a lot about that how you parse that out there. That's really clever.
I don't know that I came up with it. I think I heard it from somebody else. Maybe I came up with it. I don't know. But if I did hear it from somebody else, I think I'm pulling together pieces from other people.
Okay.
So that's the clinical thing. Spiritually, yes, repentance. The goal is not only to stop sinning, but to pursue Christ-like holiness. And so what do we do? Every Christian tradition has some concept of means of grace or spiritual disciplines. And I think many of those play in real recovery. And one of the things I'm interested in, if I can use a metaphor, I like to make barbecue sauce from scratch. So I chop up the fruit, I smoke the fruit, I pulp it, get all the juice out of it, and simmer it down on the stove. And it takes, up to a week to make a batch of barbecue sauce. I can put all the ingredients in the pot in one day, but it actually takes quite a while to get the smoke flavor into it. So, I've got a small smoker, so I have to smoke several batches of fruit in order to get the flavor that I want. I got to put the ingredients all together at a certain point, and then it has to simmer for quite a while. And so in this whole recovery outcomes thing, what are the ingredients that we need is one of the questions. And how fast can we get those on board? And then how long do we need to let it simmer? That's another question. What exactly does simmering mean? How do we clinically define that? And Rhys, I think you know this story, Shea. I'll share it for you, and I'll share it for the audience. In 2016, I lost my brother to suicide, and his sex addiction played a large role in his choice for suicide. And there's another research project going, and because I am not a statistician, I'm probably going to misunderstand the statistic here, but there is a correlation of 0.17 between screening positive for problematic sexual behavior and acute suicide risk. Like, they have a plan and they have means to carry it out. So it's a correlation. It's not a causation. But the way that my brain interprets that as a non-statistician is that's nearly 1 in 5 people who are suffering from this one thing of problematic sexual behavior are my brother. And if 1 in 5 people suffering from this are my brother, we got to get them what they need faster than 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, those are some pretty steep odds and some pretty powerful incentives. Yeah, it's not just, it's a thing I do, but and it's also not this mythical made up problem that these religious conservatives made up either. There's actual life and death on the line for many people. Yeah. There's genuine, legitimate suffering that's going on for people who are caught in these spirals. They're acting in ways that they, on some deep level, perceive as a self-violation, if not a violation to others, and don't know how to get out of that. And yeah, we need to help. We need to find a good way to help. So I'm puzzling over this too, again, thinking, so what does the help look like? And I'm also coming from the Orthodox perspective as well, where, and Shea, you've been in the tradition longer, so push back if I'm misinterpreting something. But part of how we conceive of salvation is this very transformational process, and we look at Christ as the object, as the end goal. through a long process of what we call theosis, of being transformed by grace. We become by grace what God is by nature, and then there's all the practical tools, the spiritual disciplines that play a part in that. There's the sacraments, there's the life of the church, but it is very much this whole lifelong transformation, which has some really wonderful results. The downside, I guess, if we could say one, is that it tends to be like a lifelong process. And as I've been observing sobriety work as well, and again, I'm not a researcher or a statistician either, so a lot of my observations are technically anecdotal and intuitive, but it does seem like just stopping a behavior is a necessary first step, but it's never the only step, and it's never the one that is ultimately the most satisfying, most freeing, or the most fulfilling. When a person really heals, there's what we might recognize as like the trauma healing. Like, I've gotten to face my family of origin. I've gotten to resolve like a wound from past abuse or something. But then there's more subtle things, like I tend to be a really prideful person, or I tend to not trust others, or I tend to be more standoffish than is actually good for me, and I don't have good, healthy, intimate relationships. And so there's a lot of things where they just take a long time to develop. Like you're saying, Dan, if there's the quitting of a thing, and then there's the enjoying of being quit. We could also throw in language of there's abstinence, but then there's thriving. Not just I've dug myself out of this hole, but now I'm able to build something on that. And again, for me, from a spiritual perspective, with the end goal of being like Christ and participating in the works of Christ. But even outside of that tradition, there's ideas of like, I'm leaving a worthy legacy. I'm connected to people. I'm doing something purposeful, doing something meaningful. I'm attaining certain character attributes or whatever. And that just always feels like a very long term. Like that's my life. That's the way that I live. I'm day by day, meeting by meeting, liturgy by liturgy, becoming the kind of person that seeks after those things, which again isn't an overnight thing. So I don't know if that's like helping your quest to make this like a shorter, more efficient process, but I guess I'm throwing that out as at least a path to get onto. I don't know. What are you two thinking toward this?
Shea, what are your thoughts?
I think something that comes to mind very connected. I think some of the research that's coming out, and you guys know this far better than I do, but we're this myth of addiction as like you take a drug one time or something, and then it kind of like controls you and it takes over. We're realizing that this isn't exactly what's happening. Maybe there's a strong impulse chemically, but where all this research is pointing to that deep down we're generally coping with something, like we have a trauma or something else. And I think going back to kind of the perspective I was talking about earlier, bringing more things together here with our discussion, deep down everything is coping for the absence of Christ. And then that kind of, it works up in this myriad of forms, and that's where we go into the scientific particulars of each one, which is very valuable. And I think one of the key things that we're coping with from a spiritual perspective is in the church fathers, you see this idea that the beginning of distance from God, the beginning of our heart having this hunger that isn't met, no matter what we find in creation, sexuality, pleasure, whatever it is, it begins with the moment we operate independently from God. So the serpent whispers these thoughts to Eve in the garden, and she doesn't look up at the Father and go, does this make sense to you? Not that he should think for her, but that they should co-think, co-work together. And the end of that is sin. And the fathers explain this as basically Christ as the Logos means, Scripture talks about him being the Logos. And meaning the word, lots of different translations for that Greek word. But part of what it means is he's the inventor. Like, he thought up everything in creation and he invented it. And that means he understands what everything is for, how it all fits within the order of what he intended. And so the closer we are to him, the more we see how things are intended to be used, but also the more we don't have a proclivity to try and make them fill in the void. It's twofold. One, he fills the void because the shape is Christ shaped. There's a hole in my heart that is Christ shaped and nothing fits in there except him. But also, as we restore our relationship with him, we also look around at creation and we go, whoa, there's so much more going on here than I thought. And unfortunately, without him, what we tend to do is we see everything according to our cravings. And so if we are without Christ, and on top of that, we have a trauma, we're lonely, whatnot, we see someone of the opposite sex and we just think of them as like, you can make me feel good sexually. And that's all we see. There's this infinite depth God has designed in them, but all we see is the way that they might be able to fill that one craving. And so the fathers describe, this is the transformation, Rhys, you're part of what you were referring to, this transformation where what we should be is it should be God at the top of this hierarchy inside of us, and below that is our nous, our heart, the metanoia, the change of nous, the heart, and then below that is our desires. They're not bad. They're not bad. It's not bad that we desire sexuality, etc. But what has happened is that this has been inverted, that without Christ in our heart, the desires are at the top. And the church fathers say we behave like animals, where as soon as we crave something, we go for it. And this is a lot of what we're encountering with addictions, is that we're kind of without Christ filling the void, and for many other reasons, not even understanding why we're doing what we're doing. As soon as we have this impulse, we have a hard time not just going for it. And so, yeah.
Here's also where I'll jump in and say, so that's why addiction is about more than just drugs and more than just porn. Like, if we say it, we're really talking about craving and filling that object of desire. I'm craving work, I'm craving status, I'm craving power, I'm craving security, craving food, craving entertainment. Hence the addiction interaction model, I think, makes a lot more sense, because it's not about the thing we're desiring. It's that I am desiring something, I'm desiring, and God is the object, the thing that will ultimately fill the desire, and I'm seeking something else. It could be anything else.
Yeah, it's a distorted desire, or desiring a good thing in a wrong way.
Yes.
So James says we are each one of us tempted when we are led astray by our own desires. Well, where do those distorted desires come from? So as a Reformed guy, a Protestant Reformed guy, I would go to Ephesians 2 and say, well, there's the world, the flesh, and the devil. And various forms of therapy, Christian and non-Christian, overemphasize one of those three at the cost of the other two. We have to look at all three, right? Traumas, those are blamed on the world in a sense. And in the worst case, you get blame mommy therapy, because it's all mom's fault because she didn't feed me, or she knew, whatever. That does happen because there are parents who are neglectful. But we also have to look at the flesh and take personal responsibility for our own foolish choices. And we have to consider that there is an evil, there is an enemy. And there is a war going on behind the scenes that we don't see, right? However we want to define that, there's all kinds of theologies of spiritual warfare, and I don't want to get into anything like weird and wooey, but there's something there. I think we can probably agree on that. That'd be a common denominator between the three of us. But on that desire, how did the distorted desire get there, and how do we fix it? Psalm 37 says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. And the way I read that, the way I understand that, is not that he will give you the object of your desire. Like, I could really use a new Tesla S. That'd be awesome. I don't have a Tesla S to begin with, but so a new one is not new to me. But like, hey, Tesla S, yeah, that'd be cool. Delight myself in the Lord, and I'll get a Tesla S, right?
I'll just put it over there with a Lamborghini.
Yeah. No, I think what it means is that if you delight yourself in the Lord, he will install desires into your heart that are aligned with his, rather than aligned with the fallen flesh. In the Reformed tradition, there's a helpful kind of three-part narrative that we can look at through Scripture. And you guys may have this as well. I'm not familiar enough with your tradition to know if this is also a common denominator, but there's a story of creation, and creation was good, because in Genesis 1 at the end of the chapter, God says it's good, it's very good, right? And then there's the fall, where human beings mess up God's design, and then there's restoration. And all the various Christian traditions have different ideas about eschatology and the end and whatever, but the common denominator across all of them is restoration. There is some kind of restoration of creation to God's original design. And yes, in the quantifiable research side, I'm curious to see, okay, what are the levers we can push on and pull on, the buttons we can push that are measurable participations in that restoration. But also spiritually, that restoration doesn't stop until either we go to eternity or Christ returns.
I really love how you just phrased that what is measurable participation in restoration, that unlocks some things for me. So here's what I'm thinking. Here's this puzzle we're talking about this. So there's this 3 to 5 years, this mythical, magical 3 to 5 years. That's very expensive.
It's conventional wisdom within the ITAP community, and I have a question mark on that. Like, what's
right, right. Kind of along the lines of the 90-day abstinence period, which again, kind of like intuitively makes sense, but then it's traditional wisdom. Which, and again, I mean, tradition. I mean, that is, this. I mean, that there's some value in tradition, a little bit. But anyway, what am I thinking? So if there is this idea of there's this initial burst of something, there's this initial period in a recovery process that could take 3 to 5 years, that is pretty key. I think we're all circling around this idea that ultimately sobriety is a lifestyle, and that healing is this lifelong process, that spiritual growth, that theosis, sanctification, those are lifelong pursuits. But it seems like we could note that in the initial stages, there's something about the initial stage that is distinct, and there are certain ingredients that need to be installed in the first 3 to 5 years. And I guess we could look and say, so what needs to happen in the first 3 years to set you up for the rest of your life, or something like that. I don't know, how does that sit with you too?
It makes sense to me. I think my thoughts on like the what Dan was saying a second ago, or several minutes ago. My mind, like my scientific mind, like, can we do this? Should we do this? Etc. Like my initial thought, which is probably just very obvious, but can we fast forward the 3 to 5 years? I think it's worth a try. If we actually can do that, we might not be able to. And my theological mind comes in, and it may be God's will that he, as I sometimes say to my clients, they're like, I'm not growing fast enough. Like, I'm not changing. I'm still doing these sins. And I always say, well, on average, God gives us about 80 years. So I think it's reasonable. It's going to take about that much time. So, so I do think that's kind of like the contrasting side, but both of these need said. Like, one side is, as much as it, it's a very hard thing to look at the trials and the suffering people go through and the choices they make, that God's providence is in things. But kind of circling back, I'm not opposed to seeing if we can fast forward that process, if we can, figure out what these necessary ingredients are to understanding our addictions and addressing them and overcoming them. And yeah, I think it's definitely something that is very worth the time, simply put.
Yeah. I'm actually really liking Dan's barbecue sauce metaphor, which again, so shameless plug for barbecue at Dan's house. Maybe after the symposium, if Dan promises barbecue sauce for all of us, we'll all show up.
That's a lot of barbecue sauce to cook.
Right. Yeah. But it was kind of similarly. I'll sometimes use a soup metaphor too. Just thinking like really good soups. There's some soups that simmer for a long time, my wife uses a crock pot a lot, and that's the one where you throw a bunch of stuff in and then you let it sit for 3 days. And well, in that case you don't touch it. I mean, that's so the metaphor breaks down, because I think there's a way this all continues to be a very active process, but if we look at it as there's this initial period of I need to assemble some things, and then the lifelong, and then I kind of shift into the lifelong process. So I guess maybe I'll phrase it this way. So if coming from a clinical standpoint, if I can say, let's assume I get a client for 3 years. That's an optimistic
long-term client.
It's a long-term client. Let's assume. For me as a clinician, what should my priorities be, or what priority should I attempt to instill into the client, or from the client's perspective, or from the what's the correlate like in church life for the pilgrims, from the pilgrim's perspective, if I get what should I prioritize in the first 3 years of my journey to set me up well for the rest of my life. What do you guys think are some of those essential ingredients?
So I go back to the 3-circle boundary plan that gets talked about, the red list, the yellow list, and the green list. And I spend a lot of time focusing on the green list. In my own recovery story, the green list was the lacking part for the longest time. Like nobody gave me that. That was the missing piece. What do I do instead? Nature abhors a vacuum. If you're going to take out something good, it's not something bad, you have to put something good in its place, right? So the red list being the list of stuff you want to stop, the yellow list being the list of known triggering situations or caution situations, triggering emotions, and the green list being the list of good stuff that you want to do instead of acting out. Every Christian tradition, and I suspect every spiritual tradition in the world, is going to have some form of spiritual disciplines that go onto that list. The way I talk to my clients is there's categories of things that go on there. So there's care for your body. You have to stay physically healthy. And that at the most basic level, that's sleep, diet, and exercise. What's your nutritional lifestyle? What's your fitness lifestyle? Those things. How are you sleeping? It also is going to include appropriate use of healthcare, if that's available to you, if you have resources for that. Recovery disciplines. And I think the common denominator there is be in a recovery community, and don't just show up at meetings, but develop friendships within that community that can be supportive to you when things are hard. Spiritual disciplines, whatever your spiritual tradition is, read the Bible, pray, go to church, grow in your faith. Participate in both large group gatherings and small group gatherings. There's different spiritual disciplines from each Christian tradition, but they're going to be there. There's going to be something there. Rhythms of connection with your family. So not just your spouse, and it doesn't have to be something as big and flashy as a weekly date night. In busy Western culture, that's really hard to fit in the schedule, and in the economic environment that we're currently in, where wages are stagnant and inflation is, we don't have hyperinflation, thank goodness, but it's high. Affording date night is hard. So what are the basic, the really simple, even daily 5-minute long rhythms of connection with your spouse and children, siblings and parents, presuming that those are healthy relationships? What are those things that move you in a healthy direction? Vocational disciplines. Shea, you're a coach. Rhys and I are therapists, but in all of those fields, there's continuing education. We got to keep learning. We cannot stop learning. There's administrative stuff, like I have to file my insurance claims and I got to keep my progress notes. And there are vocational disciplines that keep me moving in a positive direction. Participating in research, I think, is something that for me it's a salve to my ADHD. It gives me something helpful to the field to do that's more than seeing clients. So doing research is something for me that would be under that. Those are the categories that I talk to my clients about. And usually for the first several weeks in therapy, we're actually tracking those, like in a checklist form. Did you do them? And how well did you do them? And oh, by the way, while we're tracking it and while we're using the checklist kind of thing, we have to watch out for a legalism trap, a perfectionism trap, and a deism trap, because those are all kind of inherent in that tool, and the tool is still valuable.
Being careful to not go straight from acting out chaotically to acting in rigidly. Not going from I am the prodigal to now I'm the older brother, but looking for that more gentle, more grace-filled zone in the middle.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And while that's going on, we're looking for, and it's different for my unbelieving clients, but I'll ask them, what character changes do you want to see? It's not, I think in the ITAP performables, they call it second order change, right? So for a Christian, what fruit of the Spirit do you want to see change? If we're looking at Christian character in 1 Timothy 3, whether or not you ever serve in leadership, it cannot hurt you to be growing in those character traits. So are you seeing growth in those areas as you are implementing these things? If not, then we need to make some adjustments. We don't want to be legalistic. We don't want to be perfectionistic. We don't want to be the older brother. We do want to be gracious. We also don't want to be deistic. God has a role in this. We don't just self-sufficiently perform it on our own. God works in you, work out your salvation, because it is God who works in you both to will and to work. And the way that I understand that is, to will means to want to do the things you need to do, and to work means to make them to be effective. Because I can exercise, but I'm pretty sure I'm not the one who made the exercise effective or made me want to exercise, right? So work out your salvation with fear and trembling. That's our quantifiable participation. And then somewhere mysteriously, there's this overlap where the Holy Spirit does his part, or the Father does his part. I don't know where that line is. Spiritually, I believe it's there. But once, at least in my practice, the way that I work with my clients is once the things that are on the green list are stable, at about a 60% level for a couple of weeks, then we move on to the next stage where we're starting to get into the underlying story. Like, what are the stories in your life that created wounds? When have your needs been met? When have your needs been unmet? Is there anything clear and glaring that we can call a capital T trauma? Are there things that are subtle that have happened many times that we would call the collective effect of that a complex trauma? And we go from there.
But that sequence makes a lot of sense, though, of starting with the observables, the measurables, starting with the things we can grasp with our senses. I need to sleep well, I need to eat well, I need to physically be in proximity to people, see their faces, hear their voices, and I need to do these things with my body. And that is like laying the foundation. You create a stability for yourself so that, in this now hopefully more stable, more calm, trustworthy life, things within you can soften and things can emerge. And one perk, having had some longer term clients, it's kind of interesting. Like, a year, 2-3 years in, suddenly like all of these insights start coming out, or like there's these big shifts in like, oh, we're talking about this now. Well, you're doing this now, and there's these breakthroughs that just can't happen in the first 8 weeks, no matter how good the therapist is. So that time factor is a thing. Shea, what are your thoughts? Like, you're walking with somebody in like the first couple years of a spiritual journey or recovery journey. What do you consider to be like essential priorities to establish?
Yeah, I kind of continuing that thought of coping with something, bringing it all together. There's kind of like, I'm someone, my personality is just like, I want to start at like the root of things, which sometimes is not practical, but for some people, they really need that ground up foundation, which is like I do. And so, down here we have that Christ is this foundational thing that's missing. And I might say up here at the top is that thing that's been over exaggerated, which is the chemical component of things, which has a role though. And in between is all that other stuff that you guys in particular have been discussing, where it's like all people, all these different layers, traumas, and all of these things are what are tying in. And I think this concept that our desires are, they're either, I tell my clients, as I say, all your desires are either good, because Dan, as you said, they come from I didn't make my desires. Like, they had to come from God. So all our desires are either good or they're a twisting of a good desire. Like our desire for pornography is sometimes our desire to be distracted from pain, which is understandable. We want pain to go away. That's the promise of heaven. So it's okay to want that. We're not supposed to just pursue it any way we can. And sometimes we bear our crosses. We want intimacy. And so we simulate it with pornography. And so all of these things are at root from something good. And I think similar to what you were also saying, Dan, nature abhors a vacuum. My mind that really wants to get to the root of things goes, and maybe the whole reason that thing that's unhealthy is in that space is because there was a vacuum there already. Like it was that vacuum for Christ and for community and for all these things. And so I emphasize when my clients come in, one of the things I'll tell them is, especially, I get a lot of people, I'm a gentler person. I think all of us therapy people have to be of that demeanor to some degree, but I get a lot of people who are struggling with shame narratives, where they're really like, God's mad at me, I'm sinning so much, etc. And they want to get rid of the sin, and they're just all about that. And there's a lot of different ways that I address that. But one of the things I always say is you can't overcome this by hating it. You have to actually love the beautiful as Christ sees it, which of course implies like communing with him. But like St. Paul in the scriptures, he says all things are permissible, but not all things are beneficial. And the Israelites missed that with the law, that this wasn't about God being like, either you do this or I'm like mad at you. It was, your heart is not like mine, and it will not enjoy communing with me if it's not like mine. And so I give you this law to heal you, to make you your heart after my heart. And even in the New Testament, it has the same exact purpose. All these rules that Paul is talking about in Scripture, they still have the same purpose of conforming a man to being fully in the image and likeness of God. And so we can get really distracted. And you mentioned legalism earlier too. We can get really distracted by the rules if we think they're the ends rather than the means. They're incredibly important, but we have to struggle because of the vision of the beautiful. And so I will tell my clients, realize that like, if you want something, it's because your heart is after the beautiful, but you're doing it in a way that is not according to God's order, and it's not it's not going to produce what you want anyways. So like, even from a perspective of like theology aside, functional selfishness, what do you actually want? Okay, cool. This isn't going to produce it. You want to have peace with your spouse. You want to not be miserable and depressed every day because you're just like looking at pornography 10 times a day. Cool. Even from functional selfishness, this is not going to give you what you want. But instead, making our life and our struggle and our choices towards the good, towards sobriety, about the vision of the beautiful, I think that's what actually fills in the void. And of course, that ultimately is Christ. But we can talk from that scientific perspective of all these little things. Community is a reflection of him already, that even secular traditions, even atheists know they need community. So Yeah, so all of that to say, making the struggle about the pursuit of the beautiful rather than the rejection of the bad, I think is very key to this process.
Yeah, seeking after something good, seeking the beautiful rather than just hating the bad. So I'm also trained in the internal family systems tradition as well, and in that tradition, we talk about these different. We talk about the person as a system, and we talk about different parts that do different things, and we talk about like manager parts that try to keep you out of trouble, and we'll talk about firefighter parts that are reactive, volatile, responding to distress, and then our exiles that carry our pain and also carry our greatest capacity for joy and creativity and energy and everything. But oftentimes the parts of us that will act out, that will do damage, we call them the firefighters. My part that drinks too much, that rages, that acts out sexually, that will overeat or numb out or something. There's a lot of them there. And one of the approaches of this tradition that I really love is it's rooted in compassion. It's rooted in bringing, first accessing what they call the self, which might be their way of talking about the nous or the soul. But it's this nexus of calm, of curiosity, of compassion, of confidence, of creativity, of connectivity, some other things. And ultimately recognizing, okay, so here's my prodigal part, here's my porn looking part, here's the part that everybody hates, and that's doing all of this damage. But counterintuitively, the goal is not to exile or punish that part, but rather to move toward it, to comfort, to heal, to learn. Well, again, what's the pain that you're addressing? Can we heal that pain altogether? And so in that sense, it works really well with what you're saying. Just hating my sin, just hating my addiction doesn't fix it at all. Mm-hmm. And in fact, can perpetuate it and make it worse. Bringing compassion, bringing an awareness to pain, bringing a compassion to that pain, bringing a compassion from within yourself for the different parts of yourself tends to facilitate healing more, and also tends to facilitate intimate relationships, like emotionally intimate relationships with other people more. So there's something really beautiful there. I was thinking too. So Dan, I really appreciate you bringing in that quote, the nature abhors a vacuum. I reference that one a lot. For the longest time, I thought that originated with Mr. Spock on Star Trek, but I think it is actually a real philosopher that coined that. So I'm learning something.
I have no idea where it came from, but I've heard it enough that there's something there.
Yeah. But the other one that I often reference, and this is getting at something you were talking about, Shea, too, is without vision, the people perish, which is from King Solomon. And I'm appreciating this idea of like really emphasizing the green list or the outer circle, or the sense of like, here's what I want to build, here's where I want my life to go. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that this tends to be a challenge for people to be able to look beyond the present moment or the present crisis or the present life stage into old age. And I think it is good to look ahead to old age. When I'm old, consider your death, memento mori, to get a sense for like, well, how do I want to end? How do I want to go out? What do I want in the future? And can I reverse engineer my life from there to again, set myself on a trajectory toward that thing that I want? And so so in order to do this, I have to be in touch with what's important, what's the beautiful, what's the good, what's the ultimate end, what is the ultimate end that I want. And if I have that, I can orient my life. If I don't have that, sense of purpose, that sense of vision, I can do a lot of good things, but I'm going to be lacking something. I'm going to be lacking motivation, incentive, and when things get hard, it's going to be harder, much harder for me to persist. And if I know, well, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. Mm. I think we said it earlier, that idolatry is pursued after a good thing in a wrong way. It's a distorted desire and emphasis on pursuing creation instead of the creator. But, and we have to have this conversation, especially with sex, right? Because it is a good thing. It is a gift from God, and pornography is a gross distortion of it. Promiscuity is a distortion of it. It's not inside of God's design. And so part of the discussion has to be, all right, so there's an idolatry there. There is a good thing that you have pursued in a wrong way. The compassion approach that internal family systems has, I think even with, I have taken one course on internal family systems, and I like it a lot. Although the whole idea that parts have parts and parts of parts, it's fractal really fast, and that's more than my brain can handle. I tried to use it for a little while, and it just got too confusing for me. So, a compassionate approach that has been within my mental capacity to carry out consistently with my clients has been to say, you've pursued a good thing in a wrong way. What's good about it, and how do we maximize the good and mitigate the harm, right? There's a really helpful book, and it's actually based on another quantitative study, a very large sample size, The Great Sex Rescue by Sheila Ray Gregoire. She's dealing with a lot of the harmful teaching in evangelical Christianity about sex, and then working from both a clinical perspective and a biblical perspective to correct that. So it's a theology of the goodness of sex is kind of what she's practical theology. I don't know how theologically sophisticated the book is, but we have to have that kind of a discussion. Like, sex is a good thing. How do we get the good without the bad? And within a Christian value set, we have to acknowledge that God has a particular design. For people outside the Christian value set, I think functional selfishness or enlightened self-interest has a lot even there to say, look, is this working for you? Is this actually getting you what you thought it was? Did the fantasy deliver? And usually the answer is no.
There's a quote from Saint Maximus the Confessor, who was in I believe 9th century, and he said evil lies not in food but in gluttony, evil lies not in sexuality but in lust, evil lies not in created things but in their misuse. Mm-hmm. And the number of times I've seen people, I'm sure you guys have seen this a lot, if you're in the sex addiction world, people who are married and they're like, well, but sexuality is good, but their spouse is still complaining there's some kind of problem. And it's like, yeah, but sexuality is good, it's lawful. And that's where the legalism, one of the many reasons legalism can be so dangerous, is because we're like, but this is according to the law. And deep down, the issue has not the law. That's a symptom that matters, but the issue is the heart. And the issues are all in the heart. Traumas, lack of Christ, relationship, they all take place in the deepest part of ourselves. And so and even more than that, and there's a little bit of that positivity here, we have to realize that what are the gifts God gives us, what are those desires, are the thing that we're first and foremost going to make idols of. God gives, as I like to say often, God gives a man the gift of woodworking and carpentry. What's he going to carve his idol out of? He's going to carve it out of wood. God gives a man the gift of stonemasonry. What's he going to carve his idol out of? Stone. And that's what our heart is doing, is God gives us all these gifts, talents, desires, all things that at their core are reflections of him entirely, and in some way reflect his will for our lives. And then without him in our hearts, we carve them into the little thing that'll save me. If God gives me the gift of being kind, what do I become? A nice person. Not real love, not divine, not the kind of sacrifice that's unconditional that would come from him, but conditional niceness, where I'm super nice and then the person doesn't say thank you and now I'm irritated. And so we're taking all these beautiful things that God has planted the seeds of in our heart, and we're saying, I can grow this vineyard without you. Like, I could do this myself. And so but it also, sorry, the point I was getting at, it also, again, points to what our strengths are. So there's a little bit of hope and a little bit of just in confession, in admitting this is what I struggle with, sexuality. There's also a hope there that it's like, this reflects something I'm built for. this reflects something of God. As much as this is something I have to war with and I have to say this is wrong and I want it destroyed in my life, there's also something in the crucifixion that implies a resurrection in Christ. So we're just as much hopeful as we are at war.
Yeah. So then, talking about what is sobriety again? It sounds like in the long term, it could be things like learning how to hope, learning how to desire, learning how to use gifts in a right way, and in general, learning how to become a very present, very loving person. And in the short term, in those 3 years we're talking about, it sounds like it has a lot to do with learning how to live, learning how to care for this icon, this organism, in a right way, learning how to care for the relationships, learning how to tend to what is at hand in a right and orderly way, and then practicing with that as we go. So there's a lot more we could say about this, but there's been some really wonderful ideas and some great some great perspectives that have come out of this. So appreciate you both for your thoughts, for your perspective and experience. Dan, I really appreciate the research work you're doing, and really excited to follow along with that.
Yeah. Is it all right if I share the website where people can go and sign up for the study?
Yes, please share that, and also how people can find you in general on the web.
Yeah. So the website is restored.life, and then for the recovery outcome study, if you add a /ROS for recovery outcome study, you'll find the study page where you can sign up. There is some fundraising going on there, so if you're interested in donating to research, that's helpful as well. And as far as contacting me, the contact form on that website or sending me an email, dan@restored.life, is the best way to contact me. I'm really hard to get by the phone because I'm pretty much either with clients or with my family. And so my phone is routinely on do not disturb, and pretty much only my wife and my parents and anyone who might be babysitting my children those are the only people that can make my phone ring.
Folks, that's an example of a boundary. That's a really good boundary. So Exhibit A, good boundaries. But yes, thanks for that, Dan, and we'll have all of that info in the liner notes as well. And for you, Shea, how can people find you?
My website is thaddeusthought.com, and there's a little tab on there that says coaching. And so if you want to read about what I do, what kind of problems I tackle, pricing, getting a hold of me, that's all available on there. I also have a YouTube channel where I talk a lot about the intersection of psychology and theology, the practical spiritual life. And if you search on YouTube for Thaddeus Creative, you'll find that. And I'm also on a lot of social media, which is pretty much always at Jack Falcon, JACFALCON. So that's Twitter, Instagram, whatever. So yeah, I'm all over. So, but yeah, if you go to my website, thaddeusthought.com, you'll find most of my links there. So
Cool. And you can find info on the podcast here at patreon.com/outer circle. We're on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on YouTube. And for my clinic, my sponsoring clinic, newpatterncounseling.com. We're physically in Gresham, Oregon, now accepting new clients always. But you can find me there. Again, if you appreciate this kind of work, if you appreciate Dan's work, you can, follow, sign up for the study, donate some dollars. If you appreciate my work in bringing these sort of conversations, you can join our Patreon community, like, share, rate, review our show. And if you like Shea, you can call him and buy him coffee. It'll be good. It will not be time wasted. Anyway, thank you again, Dan and Shea, for being here. Thank you again, listeners, for being with us, and hope you all have a wonderful day as you live well.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Rhys.
You're welcome.
Yeah.